Michael Holroyd and Kate Moss, thank you both very much indeed for being with us. Now, there have been rumours for some time that children whose behaviour seems to suggest they may be anxious or suffering from attention deficit hyperactivity disorder are too freely being prescribed drugs to calm them down. The NICE guidelines, drawn up in 2008, say that Ritalin should be avoided wherever possible and never given to the under fives. But this week, the British Psychological Society has called for a review of the way medication is used. So are children being given what's sometimes called a chemical cosh? Well, Dr. Tim Kendall speaks for the Royal College of Psychiatrists. He helped draw up the NICE guidelines. Dave TRAXSON is an educational psychologist in the West Midlands. Why is he concerned about overprescription?
My main reason for being concerned is that I've worked across the West Midlands now for 30 years, and there's been an exponential increase in using medication to solve what teachers and other professionals believe are quite mild behavioural problems and psychological problems. I mean, the figures are quite startling. A 12,000% increase between 1994 and 2009 for amphetamines for children, which is a 120-fold increase. People need to know that amphetamines have a street name, speed, and they are major stimulants of the child's central nervous system.
Tim, why might there have been a rise in prescriptions? Ritalin is the one that people know about, but from what Dave says, amphetamines, speed as well. Why would they be prescribed for children and young adults in large quantities?
Well, Dave's being a little disingenuous here because it's not an amphetamine, it's an amphetamine-like substance. And the rate of prescription of amphetamine has not risen. The rate of prescription of Ritalin has risen.
Why?
Well, I think partly for the reasons that Dave has been saying, which is that there are people who are prescribing these too readily. But I also think that there are unscrupulous people who will do a great deal to get these sorts of drugs and to be able to sign up on the welfare state to get subsidies.
What do you mean by that? Are you saying parents are using their children to get drugs for themselves?
There are indeed people who do these things. But can I say, I don't think this is just an issue about ADHD. This is an issue about some people misusing and some people misprescribing and some people trying to access. These problems could be dealt with if we had proper implementation of the NICE guideline, which makes it absolutely plain that this condition, ADHD, should not be diagnosed by GPs, that the prescribing shouldn't be initiated by them, and there are pretty strict criteria for the diagnosis when it's given by psychiatrists or paediatricians.
Dave, why are you convinced that the guidelines are not being followed?
I'm convinced because we have evidence in the West Midlands. The 3 guidelines that are being breached regularly, and I'm not talking in tens of cases, I'm talking in hundreds of cases across the West Midlands. These are the guideline for giving it to children under 6. That is being breached regularly. The one guideline about monitoring the children's weight every 6 months to ensure that they don't have major weight loss, because as you know, amphetamines were used for dieting in the 1970s. So that children's weight has to be monitored. That is being breached regularly. And one group of psychiatrists said they hadn't got the manpower to monitor that at a 6-monthly interval. And the third one, which is the most worrying one in lots of ways, I mean, those two are pretty worrying, but this is very worrying, is that it's regularly being given in hundreds and hundreds of cases, tens of thousands of cases across Britain, where the main presenting problem is childhood anxiety. And Ritalin, which is a stimulant, a central nervous system stimulant, is being given to children with anxiety problems, which is ludicrous.
Tim, why would you give Ritalin to an anxious child?
I'm not aware that children are being given Ritalin for anxiety, and I know I can pretty categorically say that this is highly unlikely to be done by experienced psychiatrists, child psychiatrists, or indeed paediatricians.
I'm afraid to say, Tim, that is not the case in the West Midlands.
Well, we may just have to disagree and try and look for concrete evidence. As far as... I think we need to take some of the heat out of this. There are a sizable number of children who are significantly impaired with ADHD, and there's no doubt that it creates a great deal of sort of moral anxiety that some of them, a percentage, probably less than 30%, if the NICE guideline is used properly, should be given Ritalin. And if you look at the guideline we produced, which isn't alarmist, we looked at what fathers thought of it. Fathers of children diagnosed with ADHD regard their children to be naughty. The mothers, on the other hand, don't. The mothers are desperate for help, and when we asked the children, and we did a fresh piece of work, we asked the children what their experience was of taking Ritalin, is that they said it was most helpful because it helped them stop them losing their friends. Now, I think these are real problems.
So, Dave, these are real problems that children have. They are not just anxious, and Ritalin in that number of cases is a perfectly proper prescription.
Child psychologists all over the country don't have a problem with Ritalin being used for these extreme cases. But when I've done surveys of my colleagues in the West Midlands and at national conferences, because I've spoken at 2 national conferences recently, the figure that comes out as the consistent figure for those psychologists is that it's appropriately used in about 20% of cases. And that is worrying. We've got no problem with the use of the terminology and the correct medication. It's the numbers of children where it is incorrectly provided, like the anxiety cases, and I promise you there are hundreds of cases in the West Midlands of that.
Tim, why when there are very clear, NICE guidelines, might there be variations across the country?
This is a problem, for all NICE guidance, but it's ever so important that listeners out there understand that they can pick up the NICE guidelines. There's a version on the NICE website that's there for parents and children, and it does give clear advice about children should not be given Ritalin alone. They should not be given Ritalin as a first-line treatment, that the parents should be offered parent training and education programs, that the child should be offered behavioural work, and only if the child has severe ADHD should they then be offered Ritalin as well, but not instead of.
And what about the point that Dave made, that he seems to have evidence that children are not being monitored 6 monthly because the manpower or woman power isn't there to monitor them, to make sure that their diet is okay?
I think we've got a problem in knowing what really is happening out there, because I think my anecdotal experience is that it's not quite as Dave is saying, but I accept his is. That's his experience, that's how it is. Now, I think we need to get some real clarity about this, but in the end, if you prescribe a drug like Ritalin, you must be responsible for looking after that child and monitoring its effect.
Dave, you have expressed concerns about the impact of changes taking place in America. Why?
The reason I'm concerned about that is because DSM-5, which to lay people might be a bit too much terminology, but DSM-5 is the diagnostic criteria known as the Bible for doctors and paediatricians, is coming out in 2013. There's been massive resistance to DSM-5 in America from the American Psychological Association, and they're trying to broaden the categories of mental health. The aim of the pharmaceutical companies is to have 20% of young people as having one mental health diagnosis or another. 20%. Now, that is insanity. It's collective insanity if we follow that American model of social control.
How likely, Tim, is the American practice to have an influence here?
I think in the main, most psychiatrists in this country have objections to the new version of DSM-5. It expands categories of so-called illness until it includes virtually everybody. So I have no disagreement with Dave that we should limit its use here, but there is a tendency for things that happen in the States to come over here. So I have my anxiety about that too.
I was talking to Dr. Tim KENDALL and Dave TRAXSON.